So an céad cainteoir eile chum fáilte rih Sean Harrington, and Sean represents Sean Harrington Architects.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be part of this process. I've been deeply embedded in Kilkenny for the last year, and the reason I have is because I've been involved with Alan Sherwood Associates on behalf of Fáilte Ireland, looking at the strategic tourism plan for the city. And this has given me a great opportunity to consult with many people, to work with many of Joe's colleagues in the County Council, and it's been a really fantastic experience to really get to know the city and to see the issues as an outsider, but also to see the potential of the city as well. I want to start with some conclusions of the strategic plan we did from an architectural and tourism perspective of the city. So I just want to start with a blank plan of the city, and you can see the castle on the right, St. Canice is on the left. And the reason I wanted to point these two out is these are the two most significant magnets, if you like, that drive the urban structure of the city centre. Linking them is a High Street, Parliament Street, Irish Town, so on, that very strong link between the two. And they are the magnets that most tourists know, come to see, and the connectivity between the two is absolutely vital to their understanding and also to citizens' understanding of how the city works. Of secondary importance, but still great importance, is the route down from the railway station across the bridge and then through into the city centre itself. So the key strategy really is to try and enhance, improve, bring to life that great access between the two. And what's interesting from an architectural and historical perspective is that access is very similar, for instance, to Edinburgh, where you have a medieval city where you go from the castle down to the palace, and it's a very similar structure, both in terms of the main axis and also the side streets that come off it at right angles. The overwhelming impression on arriving in Kilkenny through the city is the traffic, and it's a very pedestrian-unfriendly route from the castle to the cathedral. And we welcome very much the idea, once the new bridge is in, that the pedestrian ways will be widened, this will be turned into a one-way street, and I think that will be a great improvement to immediately enhancing the experience for the visitor and the pedestrian in the city centre. So the other thing we wanted to do is as well as look at the two magnets at either end of this route, is to look at how you enhance the journey along it. And part of that, like I suppose any good high street, is to have interesting things to do and interesting highlights along the route. And I'm not going to go into the details of all of this just now, just a couple of them to show you how we were thinking and how with very small amounts of money, very small interventions, you can unlock the potential of the street. The first one is, you're very familiar with this, I'm sure, an absolutely magnificent building. But at the moment, it's a critical building, but at the ground floor level, very little happens other than the odd busker to really ensure that that is a building which addresses and is used properly by citizens and by visitors. So we thought that it could be a great opportunity to take the back part of the building and to turn it into the new tourism information facility for the city. So something which is right out there, something which is very visible, something which is lightweight and clearly modern, but doesn't take away from the beautiful building that's there already. Moving along, the next really interesting place is, as you move down towards Parliament Street, is this site at the end here where the trees are. Now this is really interesting for the sake of today, I suppose for two reasons. One reason is that this is the moment you lose sight of St. Canice's Cathedral and the tower at this point here. So for a visitor, it's disorientating. You're not quite sure where to go next if you're heading towards the cathedral at the end. The other thing that's interesting about this site is that it's at the crossing of the river, and it's also the threshold of the way into the Diageo site. So it's an absolutely critical moment, both for how you understand the access from the cathedral, from the cathedral all the way through there at that threshold moment. Once you get beyond that, you can see the cathedral and you can see the tower, and you're reorientated again in a clearer way. So what we wanted to do here is to pick up on the aesthetic or the nature, the vertical nature of the tower, to remind you what you're going towards, and to do something which is an exciting new structure that's not a building. We thought in our discussions one of the most exciting potential things for Kilkenny City is to turn it into a garden city, and I'll come on to that a little bit further on. So we looked at various things around the world where you have vertical gardens, and we thought it could be a very exciting moment at that point to have a vertical garden. So we've designed a tower, which is made of timber, and it's got an observation platform at the top, and it's a little kind of memory or an introduction to the idea of the round tower, but it's a planted tower, and it's irrigated by a water wheel that's in the river next door, pumping water naturally up to the top and irrigating the garden down. This could be a major attraction in its own right. And at night time, then it becomes a beacon, and it draws you down to that part of the street so that you can then turn the corner and understand that the cathedral is a little bit further on. The other thing that is of wonderful potential in the city is the river. And the river, the majority of the river in the city centre is directly parallel with the high street, but yet it's divorced from the high street. So we want to think, first of all, how could the riverside develop as a great garden of Ireland, an urban garden all the way along the river in quite an intense way, to make it almost a tourist attraction in its own right and a great facility for citizens. And we must also bear in mind there are bridges, a new bridge coming along, as Jim has just explained, a new pedestrian bridge, which is one in the middle, and also a potential other pedestrian bridge connecting across to the County Council gardens from the walkway along the side of the castle, down at the right-hand end. So that all enhances the usability and the popularity and accessibility of the waterside. This is the million-dollar view in Kilkenny, in my opinion, and it's one which very few people see. You have to go down there and have a picnic in the summertime. There's no immediate path along the side of the river. There's no reason to go down there. There's a railing which is aggressive to the river and so on. And you're cut off from the rest of the town by the Dunstores car park. And if you think of other places in the world, this is in Loire Valley in France. This is castles in Chinon, for instance. Most incredible views of the castle next to the river. And it's not wishful thinking, I don't think, to think that Kilkenny could have that kind of powerful image of a great river, wonderful river walks, and the castle in the distance. So, for inspiration, we went backwards, looked at historical maps, and you can see here that there's the plot lines of the buildings which are along the high street run down to the river at right angles. So, in other words, the gardens went down to the river historically as part of the houses which are along the high street. And we thought that if you could develop a linear, quite intense garden along the river frontage, so we looked at other examples, and this is the recently redeveloped waterside quays in Bordeaux City, which is a wonderful example of how you can really make an intense landscape experience, a beautiful park along the river, and it's very successful, and it's completely transformed the appreciation of the frontage, the water frontage in Bordeaux. Then there's also an incredible interest in the country for show gardens. And if you think of the popularity of Bloom in this country and many other festivals throughout the world, including the Chelsea Flower Show, you get the most amazing show gardens. And we thought it would be just the most incredible opportunity to collect them. In other words, to find the winners every year or some really attractive gardens and to invite them to relocate their gardens in plots which are along the river frontage to, in a way, recreate the ends of all those medieval gardens that went down to the garden, and then combine that with a boardwalk or a walkway all the way down that facilitates and encourages people to be at the waterfront and to see down the river to the castle. So here is a very simple plan of what I'm talking about, quite narrow plots, show gardens that could be collected over a period of even 20 years. It doesn't even all have to happen at once. And so you transform something like this into something a little bit more like this, so that until buildings are built on the right-hand side, which is what one of Jim's proposals earlier, you could plant a row of tall poplar trees which enclose the river, give it a sense of place, and help to screen the car park from the river frontage. So this is quite a formal proposal, if you like, something which is highly designed, something which is a boardwalk, which gives that great view down to the end of the castle and gives a fantastic facility, and it's relatively cost effective because it can be done over a period of time. So the next question then is, how do you join the access of the high street with this great Garden of Ireland which is along the river frontage? And I think this is really the kernel of why we're here today. And it's not just the Diageo site, but it's also eventually the Dunnes Stores car park site, which is there on the right-hand side, the right-hand question mark, as it were. And if you look at the way the urban pattern, the urban grain, which is very distinctive to Kilkenny. Earlier on I mentioned a medieval pattern of the main high street and the right-angled laneways, which are of a minor nature. Quite intense, quite small scale, but have a very distinctive characteristic for Kilkenny. How you might develop that idea and continue that grain in a natural way between the high street and the river, the way it previously was. So that instead of having something like this, you have something which is much more of a human scale, much more intense. And it doesn't mean the car park has to go. The car park needs to be incorporated into the scale of a new development on that site and also on the Diageo site. So again, going backwards, looking at the old map, you can see there there's a series of lines, the plot lines. And those plot lines are generated by the width of the buildings and so on along the high street. So imagine continuing them today in some kind of urban grain down to the river to give you a kind of footprint or a ghost of how to develop that over the coming years. So it might look something like this, just in terms of plot lines. And along those plot lines, there's paths and laneways and streets going down to the river. And that's just a great way of connecting the activity of the high street down to the new activity along the waterfront where you have this great park in as many ways as possible to get that permeability between one axis and the next axis, which is the river, which is parallel. And I think then combined with the riverside walks and all the other enhancements along the high street, that could create a really intense urban experience. And we believe it's the footprint, the inspiration about how this might be developed over the coming years. And I would say that, just one final thought, this is the most brilliant time to be doing this, because at a time of economic recession, it's the time to be thinking about how one might develop and to really, as other speakers have said, do it properly, take the time to consider it, and to have a footprint to develop into the future. Thank you very much indeed.